So I've got to be quite acute at looking at what are they doing in the game and how do I replicate that in training to allow those locomotor skills to be refined.
Yeah, and I'd probably just touch on actually as they go through the age groups, players might all do the same type of practice, but it's our job as a coach to actually maybe have the lens on the specific detail as they go older. So actually it might be a 1v1 duel practice, which is fun for the young players to do, and it might involve a bib or a ball. But actually as they go through the older age, it's actually how have you received that ball? How do you then move to the next area to complete that action? Hello and welcome to Coaching Cards. I'm Nimesh and I'm joined by Paul and Amanda, and we're going to talk today around helping players with their movement skills. I'll start with the first card. How important is it to have good movement skills, and what range of movement skills do players need to play football? Does it depend on their age or position?
Yes, so all of our players need to have a really good range of movement skills as well as really embedded movement skills. I think there is a bit of a focus sometimes that people just go over after the technical aspects of can they handle a football, can they manipulate a football, but their ability to move, get around a pitch and get themselves into good positions is really, really important as well. Yes, it depends on the age range that you're working with. For the younger age groups, you know, they're still growing and developing, so the movement skills that they need and are starting to develop will look completely different from a player that's 18 plus. You think about an under 8 and how they look and move and how they then go through a growth spurt, how that affects their movement skills, and then what that looks like later in life. It's important to understand the journey that they go on and how we can help and improve different elements of movement at different age ranges. I think the research out there says that you can't really increase speed past the age of 12. The key work needs to happen below the age of 12, so it's important that coaches start to know and understand that.
So add into that, yeah, so in the 5 to 11 age, we used to call it the age of fundamentals. So the key work you need to develop is agility, balance, coordination and speed. When you get out of that age range, when you get into more around growth spurt, 12 to 14s, you may have to go back, and it's called remyelination. So the whole position of myelination when you're doing your ABCs, once you get to growth spurt, you might have to do that again because they've grown so quickly and the body has to adapt to that. As you get older, you'll then tend to do more football specific movements, and then eventually as you get older that will get better and better. But a good base is massive. You often see in academies boys who haven't gone through the foundation phase of the basics. If you are slow physically, you're not playing the game at the top level. Even if you've got a quick brain, you have to have more than adequate pace. So you don't have to be the fastest young player in the city. You just have to be quick enough, and that starts off with fundamental movements, ABCs.
Yeah, and I'd probably just sort of wrap in there around the word fundamentals. The first 3 letters is fun. So can coaches make those agility, balance, coordination movements fun in their practices? So we get them at a young age in that foundation phase actually really enjoying doing some of those actions.
I think that looks like lots of tag games, lots of chase games, lots of agility, moving in and out of different areas, games for them, and like I said, making that as fun as possible. I think then when you're looking at some of the speed work, I think it's also really interesting the multi-sports approach to that. I've noticed that some of the girls that are the quickest later in life have had a real foundation in athletics, so they've got those movement biomechanics to be able to allow them to sprint effectively. But then understanding that football isn't just straight line speed, it's that agility areas of it. So those tag and chase based games are so key at that 8 to 11 age range.
What is the difference between fundamental, locomotive and football specific movements, which is what we alluded to in the last question? How can you help players develop these within your practices?
I think for me, so the fundamental movements, as we mentioned there, around so that agility, balance, coordination, the locomotion part is then actually utilising the body and moving the body from one place to another, so it might be running or jumping. I think that is a really important part for players to understand, especially at a young age, that we need to help them with those elements. So without the fundamental parts, they're going to struggle to actually be able to move their body from one place or another effectively in football.
I think also with our practice design sort of being really clear that we also want to develop, acceleration and deceleration skills, especially as they're going through their journey. I think it's probably one of the most overlooked things. If you speak to sports scientists with their warm-ups and the games that they're looking at, they want to make sure they've got the acceleration and deceleration parts of it, because as they are going through that growth spurt, they're so susceptible to injuries in and around the joints. So making sure that we've got physically robust players with the stuff that we're doing that allows them not to pick up those knee and ankle injuries that can sometimes happen from those acceleration, deceleration movements that you're seeing in the game.
Yeah, the thing I'd add is I see a lot of work where we're working on fundamental movement skills, football-specific movement skills, but we tend to do it to cones. So if the cone never moves, they don't have the ability to adjust to a moving target. So the only things that are on the pitch that don't move are the lines. So potentially the more that we can do tag games and the more we can do stop-start activities that are in relation to a moving object, whether that be a person or a ball, the more we'll be helping the players to go into the environments in a better way when they go and play.
Yeah, probably just around that for grassroots coaches listening to this, it's actually using that point around not using so many cones and actually getting players to be the defender. Can we put players in those positions so players have to read and react around it to actually improve on those fundamental skills to move them into the locomotive movements?
At what age or stage of development should coaches focus on refining movement skills?
We're starting to refine once we get into low YDP, being very aware of when the growth spurt is. So refining movement skills would becoming more sport specific and then more football specific, and trying to decide, okay, so if I am spinning to receive a ball, it's a different movement pattern of running. So if I'm just jockeying, my footwork will be just drop, step, slide, drop, step, slide. If I do that against Ronaldo who's running with me at pace, I'll fall over backwards. So I would have to run forwards looking backwards. So my foot pattern is completely different. So we need to look at the game and look at the type of exercises that will allow the players to replicate those refined movement skills. Example, running forwards, looking backwards. So I've got to be quite acute at looking at what are they doing in the game and how do I replicate that in training to allow those locomotive skills to be refined.
Yeah, and I'd probably just touch on actually as they go through the age groups, players might all do the same type of practice, but it's our job as a coach to actually maybe have the lens on the specific detail as they go older. So actually it might be a 1v1 duel practice, which is fun for the young players to do, and it might involve a bib or a ball. But actually as they go through the older age, it's actually how have you received that ball, how do you then move to the next area to complete that action, to give them more of the football specific detail as they need as they go through the ages. What are some of your favourite practices for improving agility, balance and coordination?
So what would be some of the best ABC practices? So juggling, certain different ways of juggling while hopping. Make a 20 yard by 20 yard pitch and divide it into 20 boxes, little boxes, and you have to travel through different boxes while you're juggling without colliding with other players. So we're starting to get some movement, working on balance skills, a little bit of agility, not a massive amount of speed, but that would be one way. Any tag games, dodge games, me just to simply running at Amanda there and she's defending me and has to tag me, but I've got to either run through a right gate or a left gate. What do we do next? Put a ball in. Does Amanda have a ball? Well, she could if I want to slow her down. So all the games that allow basic fundamental movements.
I think just thinking about your practice design and the design area. So if you're wanting to work on speed, thinking about those distances, are you wanting to work on speed in small areas or longer distances, and how that might be relevant for different positions? So for example, in our midfield area, we might be looking at our ability to be quick over 5 to 6 metres to get and put pressure on the ball. That might look different for a winger or a centre-back or a full-back that's tracking back a player. So thinking about your practice design in the spaces and making it really relevant for the movement skills that they will need.
Probably good practices to help support the ABCs would be around multi-ball type practices. So you might have one ball that's fired in and the players are going a certain way, but then as soon as that ball's maybe out of play or a goal scored, you fire another ball in another direction, so the players have got to physically turn and move in another direction, But I think also a top tip would be around competitive elements in practices. So if we can raise the stakes of the competition element in a practice, players might then be more enticed to want to try and move in a certain way, try and get to another area before a teammate to help them with some of those ABC movements, but also link into the locomotion around being able to run and jump.
Every player is different, but do you have any advice to help coaches identify when they need to help their players develop their movement skills further?
I think, observation techniques are really, really important for that, having that time in your sessions to watch players move. So making sure that when we're watching practices, we have sort of a bit of an eye on what are their movement skills look like. Have we got players that are bumping into and running into players more so than others? Does that mean that they haven't got their accelerations or their decelerations right? Have we got players that are falling over regularly? What sort of growth spurt are they going through at that point? Is it because they are growing, or is it because they haven't developed those fundamental movement skills to be able to do those elements of it? So I think having that skill as a coach to be able to watch those elements and recognise it, and then you can step in and go, well, I think we might need to look at a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that with those players to help them with those movement skills.
If you know your players and you know the game, potentially, example, if you only ever play as a number 6 in a 4-3-3, you don't get the opportunity to run long distances. Will be an issue if you ever play in a team that plays 4-4-2. You will only ever pass short distances. Therefore, your body's not used to making long range passes enough. If you then link that across to playing right back or wing back, you have to be good aerobically at getting the distances up and down the pitch. So whether we're in grassroots or in pro game at academy, then we need to make sure that we know the player, we provide an individual program, but we also give them a wide enough range of physical development to enable them to go to the next stage. That may or may not be restricted or developed, but that will depend where they go.
How can coaches help players develop their movement skills on a match day?
So I think on a match day, it's more around, it could be those individual moments. It could be actually we've set some challenges around what we might go after if it's quarters. So if a grassroots team plays 4 quarters, the first quarter might be actually physically, we're going to have a focus on pressing. So it might be pressing really high. So they've got to work on accelerating and deaccelerating at the right moment. We can work on different elements of that physical movement through different aspects rather than trying to go after loads of different things on a game day. We could break it down either into individual things, it could be a unit challenge, or it could be something that we go after per quarter.
So I think you've got to be adaptable and just make sure that your players are conditioned in that they can adapt to both sides of the game, and as they get older, more robust. How that looks will depend on the variety of the games program that you put together. So again, if you are playing a team who dominates the ball against you, therefore you're going to have to be quite good at shuffling, sliding, etc. So there's a physical practice. But the next week you might be playing against a team who you know aren't great in possession, so you can high press. So how you put your games program together is crucial at all levels. If you play older age groups, you get a different challenge. If you play younger age groups, you get a different challenge in all 4 corners, but we're obviously talking about movement skills. So there's quite a lot in that question that we have to think about, and it comes back to variety, variation. It comes back to making sure that the players can adapt to all physical challenges.
I think just to add to that I'm going to call it the warm-up time, but the period before the game can be utilised in different ways to get some of that repetition of those movement skills. Can we on that day put in some tag-based games? Can we have some different sessions that are setting up that can have some different movement areas in it, especially if you're a grassroots coach and have only 2 sessions a week, one being a game day? Can you use that time before the game to embed some of those movement skills?
I think what's also important there for grassroots coaches, it just sort of came to mind, was actually if we don't rotate players and we don't involve the substitutes in enough game time, they may not get enough of those physical movement patterns that they need. So I think it's really important for coaches, especially at grassroots, to give players the variety to play in different positions, but actually also give them enough game time to help them get actually through these movements. Do you have any advice to help coaches build up the fitness and movement skills of players who have just returned from injury?
I think, when you've got players coming back from injury, it's really important that we don't just throw them straight back in and expect them to cope. If we throw them straight back into that environment, they're more likely to get re-injured quicker. So we've got to have almost a staged approach of throwing that back in. If you work in a professional setting, using the UMDT to help, support that. But in the grassroots setting, thinking about how can we manage this? What does that look like? What does that stage approach need to be for them? Is it as doing a lot of non-contact work for the first couple of weeks and then slowly introducing a little bit of contact, bit of ball work, depending on the injury that they've had, and just managing their minutes when they return as well, not expecting them to be able to play a full game because that fitness will have decreased.
Specifically in grassroots, it's important to talk to the player, because you haven't got the backup of the physio in the room next door who can make those decisions for you. So you need to make sure you know the player, know what the expectations are physically in other areas, i.e. school, other sports, how much they have played, what level they were at when they were injured, what the advice was if they did go and see a physio, what the advice was to return back to playing, and it is staged.
Yeah, brilliant. I think for me, just with a grassroots lens on, would actually be if a player is injured for a long period of time, what's going to be their role now for the season? I think if we say to them they're not involved in training or in game days, and then they have maybe 3 months out, socially they're going to miss that part of being with their teammates. So it's important that they have some involvement. Could they be given like an assistant role? Could they develop some of their tactical knowledge of the game? I think it's really important that we don't just help them from a physical sense to get back, but also socially and psychologically we keep them engaged through other parts of the game, so they don't see it as something that's going to hinder their performance, but actually when they come back physically they're going to be in a good position, but technically, tactically they're still going to be able to play the game.
What advice do you have to help coaches develop their players' movement skills when working in different areas of the game?
If we work in 5 to 11 foundation, age of fundamental movement, so that it's all around ABCs, game-like activity, providing competition motivation. When we get into YDP, it becomes more around where are they up to in their physical development? Have they gone through growth spurts or not? So if we want to then develop aerobic capacity, you can't do that until they've gone through the growth spurt. And then at those ages as well, if they have gone through growth spurt, they may need to re-practice some of the movements that they're not as good at. They become cumbersome. They're getting used to the fact that their bones have grown quicker than their ligaments. So therefore you've got to give them time to develop and remyelinate. As they get into older YDP, you're looking more around what are the football-specific movements. Early YDP, it's more sport-specific movements. And then when they go into PDP, it's more refinement of, okay, strength, more aerobic. What would that look like? So we have to be, as a coach, really aware of where they're at.
I think for me, around the different age groups, so when I think about grassroots coaches, if we say to them, right, physically we want to try and get some out of the session, they might think, right, we'll make the area really big. But that doesn't necessarily mean the players are going to hit a certain number of high-speed running or the number of accelerations, de-accelerations they need just because you've made an area bigger. I think coaches need to be really careful, and they can really use that as a tool of theirs to actually get the practice design right and the area dimensions. But linked to the dimensions is actually the time they're actually on a task for. So if they're doing a passing practice as an example, if they do it for too long, they may reduce the detail in it or the actual intensity. So it's actually just being playful with it. And if you're a grassroots coach and you're watching this thinking, I'm not quite sure what my area size should be or how long I should take on a session for them to develop their movement, just have a go at playing with it. If we make an area really small, sometimes we might say, oh, we're going to get more 1v1s or they're going to have a tighter turning circle. But the ball might be out of play a lot more because you've made an area really small and there's more errors.
So I know we've delivered some CPD around this recently, so there's a question about working in disability football and with different impairments and how we might adapt the space that we would need to work with those. Is there any elements you want to add on that?
I think around the utilising the managing difference in the disability CPD is actually the type of practice you put on and the stimulus you might use will give you a different return out of the practice. So you might have like a long and a thin pitch, and then on the next side of it you might have like a really wide short pitch, but they might be doing the same activity but there'll be a different return based on what they're doing. So I think you can try and be playful with the areas you use to actually bring out different returns.
Yeah, I think if we're working with players that might have, cerebral palsy, just being mindful of the rest periods that they might need, and adapting our space and our delivery area to make sure that we're mindful of what that looks like for those individuals can be really, really key.
To wrap up this discussion, what are your quick-fire top tips to help coaches develop their players' movement skills?
I'll go with one top tip. I think it's around the activity. So if we try and make something fun, I'll use an example of, so just say we're playing like a basketball type activity within the football session. It's actually relating it to movement skills. So I'll only offer a point if they land on both feet, or I'll only offer a point if they've landed on one foot and then they've got to bound onto another foot. So it might be actually fun games, but actually making sure that we hone in on the detail to make it movement specific.
I think making sure our practice areas really replicate what we're going after in the game. Have they got abilities to be in tight spaces, to twist and turn? Do they have the ability to run over some longer distances if that's what the game needs? And then being just mindful as the players get older, how do we develop that robustness? How can we make sure that they have and play as many minutes as possible amongst the squad to ensure that they are getting that robustness so that they can develop their aerobic and anaerobic capacity to meet the demands of the modern game? Planning
is key to make sure that the players get the opportunity to develop a range of physical movements is massive. So we've got to plan, we've got to know what the returns are, but then we've got to teach the basics, because if we don't teach them, they don't become as good as they may be able to come. We have to plan, know what the returns are, and teach.